The sun dipped low, painting the Galilean sky in orange and purple. Jesus had spoken for hours, his words quenching a deep spiritual thirst. People from towns and villages gathered, drawn by hope and love. The crowd was vast, their attention fixed on him. Time slipped away, hunger crept in, stomachs rumbled, children grew restless, parents exchanged worried glances. They were far from home, with little food. The disciples noticed the shift. Tired eyes, faint cries, energy fading. A new urgency filled the air. What about food? The need was real, pressing, human. Jesus saw it all. Weariness, hunger, concern. He cared for their bodies as much as their souls. This was not just a teacher, but a shepherd. He knew what was coming. The disciples felt overwhelmed, but Jesus remained calm. He saw the end from the beginning. The crowd's spiritual hunger was now matched by physical need. The stage was set for something extraordinary. The disciples waited, uncertain. The people waited, hungry. Jesus unhurried, prepared to act. The storm of hunger gathered, but hope lingered. In the quiet, a miracle was about to unfold. The teacher was ready to feed his flock. The story of abundance was about to begin. The disciples huddled, concern etched on their faces. 5,000 men, plus women and children. How could they feed so many? The task seemed impossible. A mountain of need before them. Their solution? Send the crowds away to buy food. It was practical, sensible, and safe. But Jesus surprised them. You give them something to eat. Bewildered, they questioned him. How could they afford it? 200 denarii wouldn't be enough for even a bite each. Their calculations fell short. Their faith wavered. They saw only lack, only impossibility. Doubt settled over them. They looked at their empty pockets, not at Jesus. They forgot the one who calmed storms and healed the sick. Their eyes were fixed on the problem, not the provider. Jesus challenged their perspective. He invited them to see beyond their limitations. The disciples stood at the edge of faith and fear. The crowd waited, hungry and hopeful. The disciples' doubt was real, but so was Jesus' power. The impossible was about to become possible. The lesson looked to him, not the problem. The disciples were about to witness a miracle. Their faith would be stretched. Their hearts would be changed. The mountain of need was no match for the one who stood before them. The story moved forward toward the miraculous. Jesus didn't scold their doubt. He asked, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." The disciples searched the crowd, finding only scraps. Andrew returned with a boy, 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. It seemed laughable, a tiny meal for thousands. "But what are they among so many?" Andrew asked. The boy didn't hesitate. He offered all he had. No calculation, no fear, just trust. His small hands placed his meal in Jesus' hands. A simple act of generosity, a seed of faith. He wasn't a disciple or a leader, just a child with a willing heart. His faith was enormous, his gift sincere. The disciples saw lack, the boy saw opportunity. Jesus saw the heart behind the offering. Sometimes the greatest faith comes from the most unexpected places. The boy's gift set the stage for a miracle. The disciples watched, uncertain. The crowd waited, unaware. The boy's small act would feed thousands. Faith, not size, mattered most. Jesus honored the boy's trust. The lesson: offer what you have, however small. The miracle begins with an open hand. The disciples learned from a child's faith. The crowd would soon learn of God's abundance. The boy's lunch became the seed of a feast. In God's hands, little becomes much. The story of the loaves and fish was about to unfold. The impossible was within reach. Jesus received the boy's gift and honored his faith. He instructed the disciples, "Have the people sit down." The crowd settled on the green grass, order emerging from chaos. The disciples organized the groups, preparing for something unknown. All eyes turned to Jesus. He took the loaves and fish, looked up to heaven, and gave thanks. No complaint, no frustration, just gratitude. He blessed the food, acknowledging the source. In the face of scarcity, he modeled faith and thankfulness. The disciples watched, still unsure. The crowd waited, expectant. Jesus' prayer bridged the gap between lack and abundance. The moment was quiet, sacred. The stage was set for a miracle. Gratitude preceded the provision. Faith preceded the abundance. The disciples' doubts lingered, but hope grew. The blessing was the prelude to the miracle. The crowd was about to witness God's generosity. The miracle was ready to unfold. Jesus broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples. They distributed the bread and fish, starting with so little. As they gave, the food didn't run out. The miracle unfolded in their hands. Bread and fish multiplied as they shared. The disciples' skepticism turned to awe. This was no ordinary meal. It was a miracle in motion. The supply increased with every act of giving. Group after group received their share. The disciples returned for more. Baskets never empty. The scriptures say simply, "He kept giving, they kept sharing." From 5 loaves and 2 fish, a feast emerged. The disciples became participants in a divine event. Their doubts melted away, replaced by wonder. God's power was undeniable, right in their hands. The crowd received bread from heaven, fish from the heart of God. The disciples were conduits of grace. The miracle was personal, tangible. The impossible became reality. The disciples' faith grew with every handful. The crowd's hunger was met with abundance. The miracle was shared, not hoarded. God's provision flowed through willing hands. The feast continued until all were fed. The crowd's hunger turned to wonder as food was passed around. Children's faces lit up. Laughter and joy rippled through the crowd. Everyone ate, not just a bite, but until they were satisfied. Thousands received enough to restore their strength. The disciples moved among them, ensuring all were fed. No one was left out. All were included in this divine feast. The atmosphere shifted from weariness to celebration. The disciples' anxieties faded, replaced by joy. They were witnesses and servants in a holy moment. This was more than a meal. It was a taste of the kingdom. God's compassion became tangible, His power visible. The old and young, rich and poor, all were satisfied. Hearts were filled, not just stomachs. Love met them in their need. The miracle was complete. Every soul satisfied. The disciples saw God's care in action. The crowd experienced unexpected blessing. The miracle was about more than food. It was about God's love, practical and powerful. The people left with full hearts and full bellies. The disciples' faith was renewed. The story of the loaves and fish became a story of abundance. God's provision was more than enough. The miracle lingered in every satisfied heart. The lesson: God's love meets every need. When all were fed, Jesus said, "Gather the leftovers, let nothing be wasted." The disciples collected the remains, 12 baskets full. The one who created abundance valued every crumb. This was a lesson in stewardship and gratitude. God's gifts are to be cherished, not squandered. The miracle wasn't just in the feeding, but in the overflow. 12 baskets, one for each disciple, a reminder of God's provision, or perhaps a symbol of God's complete care for His people. The disciples marveled at the abundance. Their empty hands now struggled to carry the overflow. God's generosity exceeded every expectation. The evidence was tangible, heavy in their hands. The miracle was undeniable. God's supply always exceeds our demand. His grace is more than sufficient. The disciples had a story to tell, a story of abundance. The crowd saw God's care in every leftover piece. The lesson: God provides, and He provides abundantly. Nothing is wasted in His kingdom. The disciples learned to trust His provision. The miracle ended with baskets of grace. The story was complete, but the lesson endured. God's generosity knows no bounds. The disciples' faith was forever changed. The miracle of the loaves and fish became a legacy of grace. This event was more than a story about food. It was a lesson in faith. The boy's small gift, offered in faith, became a miracle. God uses small acts of faith to do great things. The disciples doubted, but Jesus involved them in the miracle. He showed them His power transcends human limitations. Faith isn't about having all the answers, it's about taking a step, offering what we have. Even a little faith can move mountains or feed multitudes. Jesus honored the boy's trust and stretched the disciples' faith. He invited them to participate in the impossible. Faith is the channel for God's power. When we offer our little, He multiplies it. The miracle calls us to examine our own faith. Do we see impossibilities or opportunities for God to work? Are we willing to offer our 5 loaves and 2 fish, trusting He can do the impossible? The disciples learned to trust beyond their doubts. The boy's faith became a model for all. The lesson: God can use anyone and anything offered in faith. The impossible becomes possible in His hands. The story challenges us to believe, to trust, to give, to expect miracles. Faith is the currency of God's kingdom. The miracle of the loaves and fish is a call to believe. Generosity shines in this story, embodied by the unnamed boy. He gave all he had, unlocking a miracle. God often waits for an open hand before pouring out abundance. Generosity blesses both giver and receiver. The disciples learned to receive from Jesus and give to others. They became channels of God's provision. God wants to bless others through us. He invites us to participate in his compassion. This miracle declares God's desire to provide. He is a God of abundance, not scarcity. He sees our needs and delights to meet them. His resources are limitless. Trusting in his provision is key. The disciples first trusted their own resources, but Jesus showed them a better way. Trust not in what you have, but in who he is. When we face impossible challenges, look to his fullness. Trust his open hand and unfailing love. The disciples' journey was from doubt to trust. The boy's generosity became the spark for a miracle. God's abundance flowed through willing hearts. The lesson: give freely, receive gratefully. God's provision is more than enough. The story is a call to generosity and trust. The miracle continues wherever hearts are open. God's love is always enough. This story isn't just ancient history, it's a living message for today. We all face needs that seem too big for our resources. Our loaves and fishes may feel small, but God can use them. Don't underestimate what God can do with your offering. He specializes in using the small to achieve the great. It takes courage and faith to offer what we have. God invites us to trust him with our little. He can multiply it for his glory and the blessing of many. Step out of fear and into his abundance. Move from I can't to he can. God's power has not diminished. Look for the needs around you. Offer what you have, no matter how small. Trust him to make it more than enough. Share with an open hand and a trusting heart. Watch what he will do. He can take your ordinary and make it extraordinary. He can take your little and make it overflow. The miracle of the loaves and fish is still possible today. Trust his provision. Trust his love. The story continues in every act of faith. God's abundance is for now. Offer your loaves and fishes. Trust him to do the rest.